distinct.
Oh, boy. Okay. Sorry about the jury. How is it?
Was in the 90th percentile of her height and weight, wasn't she? Or
Well,
her height.
I think for her height, yes.
So Layla was actually pretty tall,
Yeah.
not an infant.
No, she was, for 2 years, 4 months, again, she was at the 90th percentile or so
Okay.
for length.
Are you aware of any studies that deal specifically with pancreas transections in young children like Layla, where the pancreas was transected from the Heimlich maneuver?
Oh, no, studies, no. Not
Or I'm
that
sorry,
aware of.
case reports.
Oh, well, case report, not of a child that young as Layla. I mean, there's I guess that's a problem in a sense, if you will, with injuries from the Heimlich maneuver, is they're virtually all incidental reports of people of differing ages and, of course, differing internal injuries, just things that have happened that have been detected. But as far as case study, well, there are no series or case studies, but just because, as you said, in general, the Heimlich maneuver is safe and it's, applied properly, I would suppose, it's difficult to cause internal injuries.
It's difficult to cause internal injuries.
Yes, again, like I said, applied properly and with, beyond that I can't say, but just done in an appropriate, measured way, and I would hope at least with success, because most of the times it is successful, then it probably does not cause internal injuries.
It also talks about most of the time when people administer it, they have never had like any formal training.
Most of the time, very, very few people really have had formal training outside of restaurant workers or medical people.
Okay. In that particular case, the child was lying on the floor when his father was giving him the thrust, correct?
Yes.
So
Yes.
his spine was immobilized.
Correct.
So his spine wasn't moving anywhere, and the thrusts were coming on top, correct?
Yes.
The Heimlich that was performed at the sink that Ms. Rosenbaum described, Layla's spine was not immobilized, was it?
No, it was not. I mean, her waist was, so I understand, was against the sink, and she was somewhat bent over, at least at some point.
But Layla's, at least the back of Layla's body, was to the front of Ms. Rosenbaum's body.
Yes.
Okay. So not similar to the demobilization of the spine like this case report, correct?
Correct.
All right. The child was fine in that case, correct?
Yes, the child recovered, yes.
The authors in that case report also noted that careful consideration should be given to whether or not the transection of this nature was due to child abuse.
Oh, I mean, that's not unreasonable. I mean, that's something that I think always should be, a concern. That's not a problem with me.
And would you agree with me that in that case, the child had, as reported, the child had no other signs of child abuse, correct?
Correct.
He had no bruising.
Correct.
He did not have polytrauma internally. He just had the one injury, correct?
Yes.
So he did not have a lacerated liver.
Yes.
He did not have lacerations to the mesentery.
Correct.
He did not have internal signs of bruising on the inside scalp, correct?
Well,
I guess he didn't die, so they wouldn't have done that, would they?
Yeah, I think they pulled short of an autopsy there.
I'm sure they did. But he had no other signs of bruising, correct?
Correct. There was no, discernible evidence of abusive injuries.
No fractures?
Not that I recall.
No older abdominal injuries that they were able to recognize, correct?
Correct. At least nothing that was noted when they operated on the child.
And they didn't make any notes of any siblings that also had potential concerning injuries.
So, yeah, certainly nothing that was written or not written. It just, it's an absence of information, yes.
And we talked about before that what Ms. Rosenbaum described would not be a directed blow, like we talked about. It would be something that the force would be spread out over the entirety of the abdomen, correct?
Well, yes, at that point in time, potentially, yes. I mean, that least, of course, given as small as Layla was, but I mean, that, at that moment, against the edge of the sink, it would be more spread, I would say, across the abdomen.
Okay. I guess at a later time, do you think that she inflicted the blow directly to the pancreas?
Well, I don't know. Again, she's 2 and not 11, as you have spoken about. So, you know, again, because, well, no one can do experiments like this to see what you will find and, you know, recreate, especially very frenetic, chaotic events. Those are the limitations.
Earlier we talked briefly about the spleen, correct?
Yes,
And Layla's spleen was not injured in this case, correct?
correct.
But you talked about the spleen being even less protected than the pancreas, correct?
To an extent. I mean, it's up underneath the left side of the rib cage, so it's susceptible to you know, rib fractures, especially. That's usually is the most common manifestation of splenic injury.
Do you recall conducting an autopsy on Raymond Robert down in New Orleans? This
Oh
was
yes,
a private autopsy?
yes,
This was part of some of the private work that you and Ms. Mull discussed a little bit earlier, correct?
yes,
And you were asked to come in and do a private autopsy by the family. You were hired by the family or the family's attorney
yes,
in 2007?
oh yes,
Okay. And Mr. Robert had a splenic injury, did he not?
oh yes,
And in that case, you specifically stated that it would be a crushing type injury. It would be about a stomping like how a tomato splits. That would be the force necessary to inflict that type of injury.
Object to relevancy, we don't have a spleen injury here, I would object to relevancy.
I think at this point we've established that the pancreas is even more protected than the spleen, yet he's testified in previous cases that that would be the type of injury that would be required to inflict that type of injury.
Well, that was an adult man, and he also had multiple rib fractures, which was, I mean, I would say the big problem was that there were a multiplicity of rib fractures over here on the right side, overlying the spleen, and that was the, you know, and as I said, he was an adult, also not a child. So, and then there were other issues. I mean, as you know, some New Orleans police went to federal prison because of this too. So.
Now, when you were testifying, that you were asked specifically what type of things could cause that type of injury. Do you recall, in general, being asked that type of question?
Oh, probably in general. I mean, it's been, what, a decade, somewhere in there? It's 2007.
That's when you did the autopsy, but you
Yes.
testified several years later.
Then, yeah, I'm just trying to remember, it was 2010, 2011. I mean, so that particular injury in Mr. Robert, you know, kicks or a series of kicks to the right side of the chest wall, over the ribs, I would expect to cause that kind of a ruptured spleen.
It was 2011 you testified. Sound
Okay.
about right?
Sure.
You talked about the type of what could cause that type of injury, and you said something like a high-speed motor vehicle accident, especially someone who's not restrained and flies forward. I've seen like something like this with striking the gear shift, someone who wasn't restrained and went forward and left the gear. And you talked about it being about 50 miles an hour or more to cause that type of injury, correct?
Probably. I mean, you have the luxury of having read something that I haven't looked at in, what, 8, 9 years, so, and have long forgotten about. But, you know, if that was brought out and that was a discussion, I don't doubt it.
But anyway, we're talking about a great deal of force, right?
Well, yes, on an adult man who's, well, again, who was brought to the emergency room by 2 New Orleans policemen who said that it was a drug overdose when it was not, so.
In fact, you said that you've seen people who have fallen out of airplanes or died in an airplane crash who had massive trauma, who had nowhere the type of severe injury to the spleen that Mr. Robert had.
I have, yes. All depends on how you land and what you hit, but yes.
Is it safe to say that the Heimlich maneuver doesn't have the same amount of force as, say, a 50-mile-per-hour car crash?
Well, the totality all there, you know, thereof, no, I wouldn't equate the two.
Or falling out of a plane?
Well, no, again, I wouldn't equate that either.
All right, so Layla had, she also, we've talked about the pancreas, we've talked about the mesentery, we've talked about the liver. She also had some injury to her diaphragm, correct?
Yes,
Her anterior mediastinum.
Well, okay, what?
The
what-
thoracic cavity is what I had written down here. She had some injury here, correct?
Well, there was some, hemorrhage, some bleeding.
Okay.
The mediastinum's a sort of potential space between the pericardium and the breastbone.
Okay. And she had a little bit of bleeding there, correct?
There's some bleeding there, yes.
Now, you talked a little bit about some confluence. I think you've talked about how when you look at injuries, it may be more than one injury that you see in one particular space, correct?
Okay.
And it's also, when you're looking at the injuries that have been inflicted to a person, it's important to look at the constellation of all the injuries, correct?
Yes,
Not just one in a vacuum, but you have to look at all of them together, right?
yes.
The bruising that you talked about, you said was mostly fresh, correct? And that was based upon Dr. Darasaw's report.
Well, yes, and the slides I looked at too. There's no evidence of even early healing changes.
Now, you talked to Ms. Mull a little bit about aging and whether or not you can age a bruise based upon color alone.
Yes,
And that is not an exact science, correct?
it's barely even a science. That's dignifying it. We're experienced people who have endeavored to do this are wrong more than they're right. That's the problem.
And you said that really only that no professional could look and say anything with any confidence and quote, that's reality, right?
Well, yes, like I said, I don't know of any literature that spells out specifically criteria that are reproducible for the ability to do this. That's again, I think the hurdle that none of us can pass.
And you also mentioned that only the yellow hue is somewhat helpful, and that occurs at about 12 to 14 days, correct?
That's the one thing that from my study is at least the one consistent thing that appears to be, individuals, professionals attempting to establish date ranges for contusions that has more agreement or more concordance than anything else.
But you've testified about color, have you not?
I probably have at some point or another. I don't know.
In 2014, in the case from Newton County, you said, well, everything that you see, first of all, this dark red, purple color, all that is very fresh. Do you recall that?
No.
All right. Does that sound incorrect?
I don't know whether it does or not. You're talking about a case that I forgot a long time ago.
That seems to be that you're describing a color, correct?
Well, again, context is everything, and I don't remember the case one bit.
You also said the edges of the bruise would become yellowish if it were a week old.
Well, it should be 2 weeks. If I said a week, I don't know. You're asking me things that I have no recollection of at all.
Would you like to look at the transcript?
No, I'd like to look at the report, actually, the transcript. If you want to waste some time, I can sit and read through the transcript. I'm more interested in even what the report is. I just don't remember the case.
All right. But again, you agree with me that microscopically you can tell more than from looking at color.
Yes, microscopically, you can tell more, definitely.
You would agree that many of them were acute, such as the left forearm. Do you recall all of them? Many of the bruises were acute, correct?
Oh, okay, in the sense that there's no healing alterations, yes.
Okay.
The majority are, yes.
Now the back bruising, you said that was consistent with being kicked, with the thrust that Ms. Rosenbaum was doing, correct? Well,
it was thrusting or, slapping, hitting the child's back, all those things.
Now, could the injuries have also, if Layla was lying on the floor and perhaps was being stomped or kicked or something while she was on the floor, could the injuries have come from her lying on the floor while the abuse was being inflicted?
It's possible. I would have expected more contusions or bruises over the prominences of the vertebrae rather than to the side, on either side of the vertebral column.
Okay. Now, you indicated that you wouldn't be surprised if no medical professional who testified has ever seen injuries like this from resuscitation, correct?
Correct. I would not be surprised that, there's the, well, the totality of all the injuries, I think is unique, is unusual in the context or in the world of CPR-related injuries. There are individual things that are seen, but so much all at one time is unusual for most.
Now, would you agree with me that the amount of time between when this event happened and when the paramedics arrived was roughly about 20 to 30 minutes?
Short time, yes.
A short time period. Dr. Darasaw did find some evidence that some of the injuries were older than, say that 5 minute to 5 hour mark, correct?
Well, yes, there are a few contusions, just what, 2 or 3, I think, that she biopsied. And I looked at those, and she found evidence of acute inflammation, really. So those are early healing alterations outside or beyond this approximately 5 to 6 hour time window.
Now, she found neutrophil in the buttocks specifically. She found in the muscular tissue slides extensive areas of intersecting acute hemorrhage and neutrophil infiltrates, correct?
Yes.
So that would indicate that this did not happen in that time period that leading up to the paramedics arriving, correct?
Correct. That injury, no, that's older.
Central parietal scalp, where is that?
That's up on the, the top of the head. Central parietal is the top.
Ms. Mull asked you about whether or not Layla could have gotten some of these bumps on her head from jumping on the bed.
Yes.
Do you recall that in her interview that she gave to detectives on November 23rd that she said that Layla jumped and hit her head once?
I recall it being mentioned. I don't specifically recall that it was just once versus more than once.
Now, I think she kind of left open the door that maybe it might have been more than once, but what she said was what she observed was once. Did you see more than one injury on Layla's head?
Well, there's this contusion that I think does show. In fact, I just want to make sure that I get the right ones. Let's see. Yes, the central parietal scalp, and that's the only one. Yeah, that's the only one that has any older changes. The others from the head either are just, cannot be evaluated because of the way they were processed, or or they're recent. That is no healing.
What about the central occipital and posterior parietal scalp?
Yes. Well, there's marked fresh hemorrhage, and a few brown pigmented macrophages are identified, and there are rare inflammatory cells. So that is something that is old, but it's so old. It's on the order of potentially weeks. Pigmented macrophages will persist in the skin like this for months.
Okay, but it didn't happen that day.
Correct. At least that one. No, I would not say that happened that day.
The
It's
left
much
chest.
older.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The left chest. Dr. Darasaw found deep muscular tissue had prominent hemorrhage of intersecting muscle fibers and regions of neutrophil infiltrates, correct?
Yes.
So that means that it was at least a few hours old.
Yes. Something. Yes, I would say easily at least in the 6 to 12 hour range.
So that would not have come from any kind of resuscitative methods, correct?
Correct.
The pubic area. Dr. Darasaw, one of the punch biopsies has the regions of deep subcutaneous hemorrhage with prominent mononuclear infiltrates. Does that tell us anything?
Now, the mononuclear infiltrates is difficult. It's very nonspecific, and in that particular area, you're close to a lot of lymphatic channels. Mononuclear infiltrates are the oldest, if they're even inflammatory cells that migrate into an area, and in the absence of anything else, any acute inflammatory cells, any scar tissue, anything like that doesn't really mean anything.
What about lymphocytes?
Well, lymphocytes, that's what I'm trying to say. Those come from other sources other than really response to inflammation.
So you wouldn't think that was indicative of being at least 1 to 2 hours old?
Oh, well, no, whatever, even if that isn't an injury, the finding of lymphocytes doesn't specifically mean that it actually was an injury to start with.
Now, we talked a little bit before about Layla was wearing a diaper. Now, the diaper would probably cover her hip area, correct?
Reasonably, yes.
I mean, most of the time, most people wear their diaper or pants or whatever kind of above, right at or right above the hip, correct?
Yeah, somewhere, above the hip, between the, groin, the pubic area and the belly button, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm. Now, the liver injury, Dr. Darisoff found that there were neutrophils that were present, correct?
Well, yes.
And so that would put that it didn't occur in that kind of 20 to 30 minute. That would probably put it a little bit older than the 20 to 30 minute.
Well, the liver's different. The liver, and actually there are people who have been able to look at this, that for reasons that no one really knows, in liver injuries, acute inflammatory cells may show up very, very, very rapidly. And what was also interesting about the liver was there is, evidence of, microscopic evidence of an older injury of some sort with pigmented macrophages and fibrosis, scarring. So it's something that is very old, weeks, months. It's impossible to tell.
We'll get to the healing one, okay?
Okay.
As far as the current one, though, the neutrophils being present, Dr. Darisoff testified that would be put in at least an hour.
I don't know that there's a lot of debate about that. I mean, I know people who say that this can occur in as little as 10 or 15 minutes. Like I said, I don't think that question is completely answered right now.
I want to start talking about the ulna now. You mentioned that you talked about that some with Miss Mull.
Yes.
Would you agree with me that where the fracture is located could be considered a defensive injury?
It's possible that, as far as how that occurred, it could be looked at that way, or potentially viewed as a defensive type injury. Yes.
You can kind of raise your arm up to protect your head if something's coming maybe towards your head or trunk. You might put your arm up, correct?
Yes.
And that's kind of a reflex. We do that naturally?
Yes, in general, yes.
Okay. You testified that this was clearly much older, right?
Well, yes, microscopically, it's much older than 3 to 4 weeks.
Now, you are not a pediatric orthopedic doctor, correct?
Correct.
You are not a radiologist.
Oh, correct.
And both of those doctors said that the healing would have been within 3 to 4 weeks based upon the radiology. You would take issue with that?
Well, because that's what they're looking at the X-rays and what would be expected to be present in an uncomplicated fracture of the ulna, and unfortunately the microscopic features, don't support that. But the radiology is limited.
Dr. Darisoff agreed with the radiologist.
Well, then if she did, then I think she was incorrect about that.
Now, we're also aware that the medical personnel, the EMTs, they noticed the deformity in Layla's left arm when they were in the back of the ambulance heading to the hospital.
Yeah, I do recall that. Yes.
You do recall that?
I think so, yes.
Okay. So it was obvious to them, correct?
Well, it was obvious enough such that they documented it. I don't know what else to say.
And the emergency room staff, they as well immediately noticed the deformity to the arm, correct?
Yes.
I'm going to show you states 34. It's behind you. I'll try to move it away from the bulb. Do you see this area right here?
Yes.
That's where the ulna would be, correct?
Yes.
Does that look deformed to you?
It might be. Looking at that alone, it's possible. Looking at the photo, could it be? Sure.
Now, you're aware that Layla went to a whole lot of doctors, right?
Yes.
And you said you wouldn't be surprised if anyone missed it, correct?
It wouldn't be surprising if no one looked or she was not complaining of anything.
Okay. And some of the doctors palpated, meaning that they touched that area.
Yes.
But you think that injury predated her living with the Rosenbaums?
Yes.
And absolutely no one noticed it until the EMTs.
Well, you just told me that other doctors looked and palpated and did not find it, so, beyond that, I don't know what to say.
Now, regarding non-union fractures, they are extremely rare in children, correct?
Yes, they're very uncommon in children, yes.
I want to ask you, and some of these questions may seem a little silly at first, okay? Layla was obviously female, right?
Yes,
All right. She did not have a high body mass index. In fact, she was in the 10th percentile, correct?
correct,
She did not have any open fractures.
correct.
She was not a tobacco user, to your knowledge, was she?
No, I don't, not that I know of,
She didn't have any cardiovascular disease.
no.
She didn't have osteoarthritis,
Well, no.
and she didn't have vitamin D deficiency.
Again, not that ever was known or suspected that I'm aware of.
Are you aware that according to a study that was released in July of last year entitled Risk Factors for Non-Unions of Bone Fractures in Pediatric Patients, that those were the risk factors that put younger children at a higher risk of non-union?
Well, yes, and I'm not sure if what you're reading from is what I've read from, but, failure to immobilize a fracture is also independently a risk factor for non-union.
And I have a copy for you if you'd like to look
Yeah,
at it.
I mean, I don't know what it is you're reading, as all I can tell you is what I've seen. I mean, I'll be happy to look at it, but like I said, failure to immobilize a fracture appropriately or completely is, well, it's interesting. I'm just looking at the second paragraph. Yet risk factors for non-union and childhood fracture are largely unknown. So,
That was the purpose of the study.
well, again, I don't want to waste a lot of time. I don't know that I've seen, in fact, I'm almost certain I've not seen this, but, no, what I've said earlier, and I'll stand by it, is that failure to immobilize a fracture appropriately is something that may ultimately lead to non-union or poor healing. And so, that's all I can tell you.
According to this study, the risk of non-union in 0 to 6-year-olds is 0.2%.
Oh, it's rare. You've heard me say it several times. Yes, it's vanishingly rare.
In fact, according to the chart that's on page 4, the ulna in a 2-year-old is one of the rarest for non-union.
Okay, well, fine.
Now, the rib fracture, if you're done reading that, but take your time if you'd like.
Just interesting to look, but like I said, I'm surprised this doesn't mention, failure or inadequate immobilization, which it means a significant problem. But that's fine. Okay.
Now, the rib fracture, you agreed with me or you would agree with me that type of injury is concerning.
In and of itself, yes, without any other knowledge or just looking at that as an isolated injury, it is concerning for an inflicted injury.
Okay. Are you aware that Jennifer stated that the orthopedic doctor told her that Layla's bones grow back really, really quickly?
I recall something about that, but not specifically.
Okay. In that particular, microscopic examination, Dr. Darisaw found woven bone, correct?
Well, yes, there is woven bone, off to the side in the fracture itself. Yes.
Moving to the liver lacerations, if someone did have a non-treated liver laceration, what would some of the signs and symptoms that they might exhibit if they had what is an OAS-1 or OAS-2, the different classifications?
Oftentimes, very little at all. Those are usually, incidental findings, at CAT scans primarily, where, liver laceration is found, but there's no active bleeding and it's small, and, the classifications depend on the size and depth. So they're mostly left alone.
Okay. But do people get sick from them or no?
I can't tell you. That's, as I'm not a hepatologist, I can't tell you what the signs and symptoms that may occur from that, unless there is something like a bile duct that's involved, where there's bile leakage or impingement on the gallbladder.
Now, you mentioned before the healing injury. You
In
think
the liver?
Yes,
Yes.
the liver. You thought that was several months old?
Yes, based on the presence of fibrosis and, yes, and acute remote hemorrhage. So it could easily be several months. I don't think that anyone really knows.
Okay. Now, this would have been, since Layla didn't have any major signs or symptoms, this probably would have been in the stage of an OAS-1 or OAS-2, correct?
Yeah. Silent and certainly clinically insignificant, did not lead to bleeding or any other emergent, decompensation.
Now, are you aware that and this is an adult, well, first of all, kids can heal quicker, correct?
Well, in a broad sense, that's yes, but still, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything that children have heals quicker than what adults have, and it depends on comorbidities, all sorts of things. But the injuries heal, and they go through a known and recognized state or process in general.
For an OIS, are you aware that for an OIS grade 1, the mean healing time in adults is 3 days?
Well, and that's based on CAT scans, but no one opens someone up and biopsies these to see what's going on. That means that there's no active bleeding, and it appears that the laceration is closed, and it's there's no other complications.
For an OAS-2, are you aware that the median healing time in adults is 30 days?
No, I can't tell you. That's based on clinical data and not on pathologic data, which of course is not going to be obtained because they're not operated on.
So, but you think that what you saw is months old?
Because of the microscopic features, yes. Mm-hmm. Now, well, months old meaning there may have been, hypothetically, you could do a CAT scan and not see any evidence of a laceration, but the microscopic features of the predominantly healed laceration would be there if one were to open the person and take a piece of liver, which of course we don't do.
So the injuries that we saw on Layla, you think, your opinion here today is that all of the abdominal injuries that we see on Layla were from Jennifer holding them or resuscitative methods, correct?
Yes, all of the acute injuries, the ones that have hemorrhage associated with them and disruption and no evidence of inflammation or healing.
And that would include the inner thigh.
Yes.
Your opinion is that the inner thigh injury that we see is a result of resuscitative methods.
Well, of holding her in some way. I don't know. There wouldn't be from resuscitation specifically, but holding her in a way that produced those injuries.
Your testimony today is that what you see behind you is from holding her a certain way to do resuscitative methods.
Well, holding her during the process of everything that was going on.
Now, the hyperpigmented area, you talked a little bit about that with Ms. Moll, correct?
Hypopigmented? You mean
hypopigmented.
Yes.
And you said that could have been a pressure mark.
It could be.
Okay. Are you aware that Dr. Darasaw opined that was a scar?
I'm aware she did. I don't understand why, because she just called it a hypopigmented mark, which would be, if she thought something was a scar, I would have thought that she would say that it was a scar. But she called it a mark, and I don't see that she took any tissue to look at it under the microscope. So
She didn't. And she didn't.
Yeah, okay, I'm just saying, I'm not aware she did, so, it leaves me, not sure why she called it a mark when if, at least in my understanding, if she thought it was a scar, she'd call it a scar.
Now, you said that it could have come from a strap in the ambulance
Possibly,
or the diaper?
possibly, thinking about what may have resulted in this area of pallor that, of which the skin looking normal. Otherwise, there's no irregularity to it. There's no obvious scars or stretch marks.
You said that because it looked like smooth, is that what you said before? And that might not have been what you said. What do you see when you look at it? And I can bring the photo to you if that helps you at all.
Yeah, would you do that? This is difficult to see if that's any better. Well, yes, it looks smooth. In fact, you can see the delicate skin hairs on her abdomen within this. So,
And that came from that. Here's a question: doesn't the diaper go all the way around?
well, yes.
Let me ask you this. If you knew, if you were to learn, and perhaps you do already know, that Miss McKee, who we talked about earlier, the mom from the gym, remember the mom from the gym?
Okay.
She reported that a month prior to Layla's death, she actually saw that area and it looked red. Would that change your opinion at all?
As far as just looking red, not particularly. I don't know what would just cause it to look red and then have specific loss of pigmentation in such a geographic area.
Does it seem strange to you that it's in the same area where she has that hypopigmented area?
Well, I don't know, depending on what it's, you're asking me is, I don't know, if someone tells me there's something in the sky, does that mean it's an airplane or a bird? I don't know. You're asking, I don't know the reliability even of what she's saying, other than there's a red mark that seems to be on her abdomen. So beyond that, I don't know how to characterize that, except looking at the photograph, which really doesn't do anything for me.
I'll show you some of the autopsy photos. Your testimony that what we're looking at states 404. This right here and this right here, those are from Dr. Darasaw when she shaved the child's head.
No, these I think are shaving marks here. That it's hard to say. It looks like a superficial scrape, and that looks like an interrupted sort of scrape. Something. Well, it's interrupted. It's not uniform. It's more uniform, but it's superficial. It's not a laceration or a split.
Let me ask you about these up here. Do those look like kind of healing abrasions?
Healing abrasions?
Do they look like they're in a more advanced state of healing than, say, what you were previously pointing to?
I don't know that I could do that just with those. No.
I'll show you a different view. How about states 417? Let me point to what I'm talking about.
I'm talking about this?
Yes,
These?
those.
Sadly, they're rather out of focus.
Those are out of focus.
I can't tell other than some color differentiation, but what they may represent, I can't tell you.
Now, you indicated that they could be consistent with the child jumping on a bed. Would you expect a child and hitting their head? Would you expect a child to do that multiple times?
Well, my youngest is 29, and they did an awful lot of crazy things. I don't know what to say. Children do all sorts of things. So do it multiple times. Well, sure.
Would you also expect it to be in all different parts, over all different areas of the head?
Depends on what they hit.
And the ear injury, your testimony is that the ear injury is impetigo.
That what now? I'm sorry.
The ear injury, your testimony here today is that impetigo?
Oh, on the pinna of the left ear?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, this is, yes. See, now this is, the head's been shaved, this has all been washed. It's much more, it's been changed, it's been, we're into, the third to fourth day after the death occurred. And it's, said it's been washed, although you can see some of the skin along the edge. The most significant photos are the ones from the emergency room that really show this crusted, interrupted nature of it.
Do you know who Dr. Stephen Messner is?
I know who he is. I think I've met him a few times.
He's also a pediatrician, correct?
Yes.
So is it your testimony here today that the pediatricians in this case, including Dr. Darisaw and Dr. Messner, missed impetigo?
Well, Dr. Darisaw's not a pediatrician. She's, a pathologist. But I can't tell you what Dr. Messner looked at, nor what he based or relied upon. If all you do is look at this photograph from the autopsy, that is concerning, but I can't tell you what that would be from. But that's the problem with, once everything is washed and changed, then, superficial crusted things like impetigo are altered.
Well, Dr. Messner actually testified from the hospital.
Well, good.
And Dr. Darisaw, you said, is not a pediatrician?
No, she's a pathologist.
She's a board certified in pediatric pathology, correct?
Yes, pediatric pathology, yes.
There were also injuries to the adrenals, correct?
Well, there's hemorrhage, yes.
Hemorrhage. And the mesentery?
Yes.
And on the incised findings, Dr. Darisaw found 8 areas of hemorrhage that were noted, correct?
Found in what were you talking about?
The incised scalp.
Oh, just underneath the scalp, different areas of hemorrhage, bleeding,
Correct.
yes.
All right. Anything about that consistent with Heimlich or CPR?
Well, not applied, just to the abdomen in the conventional way. Again, circling back around to the chaotic frenzy of trying to, as I see it, get this chicken out of Layla's head, out of her throat, and what her head is doing, what is happening at the time, I think is changing very rapidly. That wouldn't surprise me at all that there are times where her head is striking something, floor, sink, who knows, in the effort that Ms. Rosenbaum undertook to try to save her life.
Mm-hmm. It's what about the injury to the neck? I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead to Millie. Did you also look at some photographs of Millie?
Yes, I have, yes.
And did you note any areas on her neck?
I don't think I have those. I think there was some, as I recall, some little petechial hemorrhages that seem to be documented. That's just what I remember. You have something?
I did. It's on the screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yes, those little groups of petechial hemorrhages. Yeah, see, those are petechiae. There's little pinpoint hemorrhages. What those came from, I can't tell you.
Well, the likelihood that it came from an accident is less than 0.2%, correct?
Well, I would find it unlikely that petechiae on the neck would come from an accident.
That means there was something struck the neck.
Possibly.
Perhaps a slap? Would that be consistent?
Possibly, although, I don't see finger marks or hand marks, but, potentially.
So it's extremely rare that the Heimlich maneuver can cause an internal injury, correct?
Oh, broadly speaking, yes. It's rare that it causes any internal injury that is known or recognized, yes.
It's extremely rare that the ulna would be non-union, correct?
Well, it's extremely rare based upon that alone, I guess, ignoring what the pathology shows, which is different. But alone, the ulna, non-union fractures, I've said several times, in children are rare.
And it's extremely rare to get injuries in protected parts of the body, like the neck, correct?
In general, yes.
These are some really unlucky kids, aren't they?
Well, I don't know about what's unlucky, but, there are some things that speak for themselves and others that don't. And then, again, I can do nothing else but focus on the context of how all of these injuries occurred. If there wasn't a very complicated, complex story having to do with this child asphyxiating on chicken, I mean, I frankly doubt that I would be here, but this would be a much different situation. This is very exceptional.
The manner of death, that is something that the GBI will certify, correct?
Typically, yes, unless a coroner does.
Unless the coroner does. If the GBI does an autopsy, they're most likely the ME is going to certify the death as one of 5 different categories, correct?
Mostly, again, some coroners really, well, they want to do it themselves, and so they do it themselves. But it's what's supposed to happen is that the information is conveyed to the coroner, and they're supposed to fill out the death certificate, in this way. But all I can tell you from experience is that was not universal.
Now, the manner of death, did you ever even consider homicide?
Did I consider homicide? I mean, I think, considering it and reaching a conclusion that it's not a homicide are two different things.
Okay.
Did
you consider it here?
Well, I consider it. I would consider, frankly, undetermined as a matter of death. That's reasonable just because of all of the injuries that we've been talking about and going over in great detail, but yet with a history that explains, reasonably can explain why those injuries are there. Mm-hmm. So I think an undetermined is a reasonable conclusion at the end of the day.
Okay. And that undetermined is based upon the information that you received from Ms. Rosenbaum, correct?
Well, yes, pulling back from just calling it a flat-out homicide mm-hmm. and expressing that there is, doubt that exists, scientific and medical doubt that these are homicidally inflicted injuries.
So as you sit here today, you would say the cause of death was undetermined?
No, the manner of death.
The manner of death, I'm sorry.
If left up to me, if this were my case, I think that I probably would call, the death an undetermined only to convey that there's a difference between having doubts and being, say, 100% certain one way or the other.
Dr. Sperry, you and I spoke 11 days ago, correct?
I think so, yes.
And when we spoke, I asked you that same question, correct? How you would classify.
It's been long ago and far away. My wife has had knee surgery. There's been an awful lot of water under the bridge. I recall the conversation. So go ahead.
And when we had that conversation, you said, that's an interesting question, but I think I would rule it an accident.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could see that. So you asked, and I think I told you at the time that no one had asked me that at all, up till that time. And so, it's sitting, making a decision on the fly. I don't know. I mean, undetermined is not unreasonable, although reaching a conclusion that it's more probably than not an accident, I think is also reasonable. So I'm not the one who was charged with signing the death certificate.
Correct. Dr. Darasov was.
Well, the coroner was, I think, ultimately, but Dr. Darasov, I think, reached a manner of death conclusion that that certainly should be in her report. Yes. So, and she's entitled to that opinion. Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the other work that you've done. You, prior to going to the GBI, you did some defense work then too, correct?
Yes, back in the 90s, primarily. Yes, early 90s.
Since 2015, when you retired, you have been doing a lot more private consultation. Would that be safe to say?
No, actually, a lot less, in general than what I used to. But I am doing some defense work.
Some defense work. And about how much did you earn in defense work last year?
Oh, last year in defense work? I mean, I don't know. I honestly really haven't thought about it from that perspective. Almost all the defense work that I do is, what there is of it is for public defenders. I mean, budgets are limited. Not a lot, really. I don't know. I haven't thought about it a bit.
How about in 2017?
2017, less. I mean, this is the second trial I've been in, a criminal defense trial in 2017?
You don't just get paid though for trials though, correct?
Oh, no, I get paid, for my time and reviewing things, but usually that's, much more really limited.
Do you recall testifying just last year that in 2017 you made over $200,000 doing private consultations?
Probably altogether, I mean, the vast majority of that would be civil work, yes. That doesn't surprise me.
How many cases do you think you've consulted upon this year?
How many? I don't know. I get more calls than cases that I agree to review. I mean, I've turned down 2 this week because I just, my time is much more valuable now than anything else. So I don't really know.
And you mentioned a conference that you're testifying at. That's the National Child Abuse Defense and Resource Center 20th Conference, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Dr. Sperry, Ms. Mull mentioned to you earlier an article that came out in 2015. You're familiar with that article, correct?
It's been so long, I don't know what it is you're talking about. What article is that?
Well, the article that prompted you to resign early from the GBI, do you remember that?
I never resigned. I retired.
The one that caused you to retire early from the GBI.
Well, it allowed me to reach a decision that it was time for me to retire. Yes.
The article came out on a Monday and you retired by the end of the week.
Yes.
And in that, they also chronicled several cases in which you testified in which your credibility was called into issue.
Well, everything about credibility being called into issue, was stemmed from 2 lawyers in New Orleans who were irritated at me. That's where all those quotes that I'm aware of came from. So I don't know of anything else or anyone else that called anything into question.
Okay. Well, they didn't just talk about a case in New Orleans. They talked about a whole bunch of cases across the country, correct?
Well, the reporter himself who put this together read through depositions and transcripts and whatever conclusions he came up with. That was his basis. There was no one else that I'm aware of that decided to call anything into question.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of those. Isn't it true that you did a private consultation on a case involving a Thomas Duncan, which was a prisoner in custody case down in Ocala, Florida?
I don't recall any of that.
In that particular case, you were hired by the sheriff's department.
Okay.
For this other case.
I recall nothing about it.
In that particular case, you found in favor of the sheriff's department or the sheriff's deputies.
Everything that you're telling me, I have no recollection whatsoever. I'm sorry, but I have no idea what you're talking about.
When the AJC article came out, you prepared a memo to the GBI, did you not?
Yes, for Director Keenan, yes.
And in that one, you did not deny that this had occurred?
Oh, deny that it occurred? No, I don't. Again, as far as the specifics and the nature of it, I'm sure I had some record that I had done something, but as far as what it was, who it was for, I mean, I don't know that I recall then, but it's been 4 years, so I don't recall it all now.
You were also contracted to work on a case out of Oklahoma, where it was another in-custody death, but in that case, you were hired by the family.
I don't know. What's the name of the case? I don't know.
Sure, Mary Giannetti.
I'm sorry. I mean, I vaguely remember the name, but beyond that, I don't know.
Would help refresh your recollection if you were to review Giannetti versus City of Stillwater?
Possibly. I don't know.
Lights can come up.
I don't know, about reading through this, I really don't recall. I don't recall this a bit.
Well, the facts were very similar into how the deaths were occurred, but your opinion changed based upon who you were hired. Do you recall that?
No, the facts were very similar, so therefore my opinions changed. That's your. So, no. I mean, this is actually whatever this document is that you're showing. I've never seen or even knew existed. I vaguely remember this. Yeah, it was decided February of 2006. So that's been 13 years ago. No, I'm not surprised. I have no recollection. Sorry.
Do you recall the situation where you were hired by a doctor in Ohio to provide expert testimony at his hearing when they were attempting to suspend his medical license?
Yes, I do recall that. Yes, that was a Ohio Medical Board opinion, yes.
And the reason that they were attempting to suspend his medical license is because he had written a letter stating that an elderly person who was legally blind was fine to fly an airplane.
I think generally, yes, he had, my recollection is that the doctor had passed or allowed this individual, basically to keep his medical license, or excuse me, his pilot's license, not medical license, yes.
And what happened was that he then flew a plane and it crashed with 5 people in it.
Correct, and everyone died.
Correct. And you stated that it was a bad heart, not his vision, that incapacitated the pilot.
Well, yes, it was a causation issue for me that based upon the autopsy and also the scene investigation, the circumstances that, in my opinion, that it was not a vision issue, it was his heart issue that really caused the accident to occur.
And you based that upon a cardiac emergency while operating the plane because his seat was reclined upon impact. The individual in the passenger seat had knowledge of aircraft operation, and the individual behind the pilot had the operation manual in his lap. That's what you based your opinion on. Does that sound familiar?
I recall somewhat about it, yes.
And you admitted on cross-examination that you had absolutely no experience in accident reconstruction.
Correct, not an accident reconstruction, no.
That items could have been dislodged upon impact, including the operations manual.
That was possible. I think that's what little I recall of it.
You had no knowledge concerning the pilot's seat model and how much the seat could endure upon impact.
Correct.
So you were basing your testimony based upon things that you had no experience in.
Well, no, I was basing it upon the circumstances. I mean, what was documented after the plane crashed and what was found, at the scene.
And the hearing examiner, based upon your testimony on cross-examination, did not find your testimony.
Your Honor, I would object. This is not relevant. It's hearsay as to what the hearing examiner found. And it's not relevant to this case.
I can move on.
All right, let's do that.
Let's talk about your time at the GBI.
Okay,
When you were at GBI from 1997 to 2015, correct?
yes,
When you left, your salary was $186,000.
somewhere in there, probably.
Okay. And while you were at GBI, you would take both civil and you would also take some criminal non-defense, correct?
Rare ones, yes, when I was called, yes.
And do you recall stating last year in a trial that you would earn, essentially you would double your salary each year by doing private cases?
Yes, that's reasonable. I mean, that's at least for the amount of income I made as a private consultant was about equivalent to my salary, yes.
Okay. And between 2010 and 2014, you performed 208 full-time autopsies at the GBI. Does that sound correct?
I don't know. That's not something I kept track of. I mean, you could easily get it. I'm sure you did by, going through open records at the GBI.
And you also, you accepted 158 private cases for outside review.
I can't tell you, that I did or not.
Between 2010 and 2014, there were at least 67 days that you reported working for at least 8 hours for the state. Is that correct? Where you were elsewhere?
Well, I don't know. I think that's what if I recall, that's what the reporter alleged. But there were there were errors, there were mistakes in there.
13 of those days, you were actually out of state. They were able to independently verify that you weren't even in the state, but you said that you said, according to your time log, that you were.
Okay, I mean, again, I don't know I don't know the basis for all that.
As a result of that, when you retired early, you had to forfeit, what was it, about 5.5 months worth of accrued time?
No, I think it was, what, 200 and some odd hours, I don't know, of, what's it called, forfeited leave. I mean, it was leave that was banked away that had no cash value that would only be applied to my retirement. So that was what decision, well, Mr. Keenan, who was the director at the time, that's what he and I arrived at for the mistakes I'd made.
For mistakes you made?
Yes.
When you left that week?
Well, when mistakes I had made, and after I looked at it, and I had already decided to retire in 2016, and honestly, I saw no reason to wait. There was nothing that I served to gain, and nothing else that I would achieve by staying any longer.
Now, as a government employee, when you sign your time card, you are actually certifying that it's a true and correct statement, correct?
Well, that's what it said. Yes, that's what the at least attempt was made.
And at the bottom of each, it says that a violation of this, by you are certifying the accuracy of the record to the best of your knowledge under penalty of law for knowing misstatement of the record pursuant to OCGA 1610-8, correct?
Well, that's what it says anyway. Yes.
Okay. And you admit that the information that you put on there was false.
I admit that I made mistakes, and certainly, I suppose, as you know, I don't know who it is you work for, but intentionally falsifying timesheets is sort of the stupid road to hell. I made errors, and I certainly acknowledge those.
As a government employee, it's not just an inconvenience; it's a felony.
I don't know. Okay.
Can I see what you showed me?
Okay.
I can. All right, mark this as states. Mark this as states 480. Did you have a chance to read it, Dr. Sperry?
I did.
And you agree with me it's a felony?
Well, that's in accordance with what that says, and if it's, I don't know. Not being a lawyer, I don't know what decisions are made or how they're made, or what decisions are made in order to pursue that. But there certainly was nothing that was, done with respect to me. No investigation. There was, the only thing I was ever asked to provide was the memorandum that you mentioned that I gave to Director Keenan. So that was the end of it.
All right. That wasn't the first time, though, that you had some issues. Do you recall back in 2009 when Fox 5 did an investigation regarding violations of your outside employment agreement?
Yes, yes, I do recall that. That also was at the instigation of another attorney who had gotten very irritated with my opinions. So.
I'm almost done, Dr. Sperry. Do you recall giving an interview to the Augusta Chronicle in June of 2015 regarding Dr. Darasol?
Not offhand. I don't know whether, I'm just trying to think what this, when was that?
June 20th of 2015. That would have been 5 months to the day before she conducted the autopsy on Layla Daniel.
I must have, I'm just trying to think, why I was over in Augusta, unless this was all I recall is perhaps a meeting where I went with Director Keenan over there, because at that point, they wanted their medical examiner's office reopened. I think that was the real issue at the time.
It was about the fellowship program that you gave this particular interview.
Well, yes, that was, we're trying to pursue the development of a fellowship with what was the Medical College of Georgia. I think they call themselves something else now.
And in regard to Dr. Darisaw, do you recall saying, quote, "She's probably now better than I am as being the most experienced in child abuse cases in the state"?
I don't recall doing that, but that doesn't surprise me.
Nothing further.
All right, thank you. And reader.
Dr. Sperry, were you prosecuted?
No, I wasn't prosecuted.
Were
I
you
wasn't
fi-
investigated. No one really cared.
Were you fired?
Oh, no. I retired.
Were you put in jail?
Oh, no. And I wasn't told to retire. I wasn't told if I didn't retire, something would happen or I'd be investigated. I wasn't told anything at all whatsoever. It's just in my discussions with Mr. Keenan, I reached the realization that the best thing for me to do was to retire. I didn't need anything anymore. And also the ridiculousness of the articles just detracted away from everything that I'd been doing, and also the good work the medical examiner's office had done for many years. And like I said, my decision, I'd already decided to retire the next year and designated Dr. Eisenstadt, who is the chief now, as my successor. And I saw no reason why I should wait. There was nothing that I had to gain whatsoever. So I retired.
Did the Attorney General's office investigate you?
Well, the reporter who wrote the articles, being the nice guy that he actually called the Attorney General's office and wanted to know if they were going to prosecute Dr. Sperry. So they contacted Mr. Keenan. He supplied them with the memorandum that I had given him, and ultimately, actually at my retirement party, Mr. Keenan told me that the Attorney General's office would get an answer in a couple of months, and they did. They considered it an employment, how'd they put it, an employment situation or employment something, but wanted no further information, and felt that he had handled it completely.
Did the governor sanction you in any way?
Oh, no, he wrote me a very nice retirement letter thanking me for my years of service to the state of Georgia and wishing me a good, happy retirement with my family and friends.
Does the state of Georgia employ you? Do you still testify for the state of Georgia?
Well, yes, I do when I'm called. Specifically when I've been routinely called on cases of my own that I did while I was the chief medical examiner, and actually been called a few times just by district attorneys who know me, who have questions.
So your opinion is still sought after by the state?
Yes, it has been. No one seems to have any problem.
I want to talk a little bit about statements that Mr. Chase made to you. With regards to this individual that claimed to have seen a redness in the stomach area, were you aware that that person was a friend of the family of Layla Daniel? Were you aware of that?
I mean, I have been told that, yes.
And were you aware that that person only came forward a month after the incident?
Yes, I did know that.
And were you aware that that person was a friend, was on the Facebook of both the sisters, both Kim Smith, and on the Facebook for Justice for Layla? Were you aware of that?
No, I wasn't aware of all of that. That's quite interesting, which is another reason why actually I have no Facebook presence. I've never had a Facebook presence. I don't want anything to do with that.
And what conclusion what weight would you give the testimony of someone who comes forward voluntarily 30 days after the fact and claims to have seen a red mark, but also happens to be friends of the family who were at the moment suing defects in the state of Georgia for a considerable amount of money?
Oh, with all of that, I would not. I'd be very reluctant to give that any credence whatsoever. I mean, talk about there's someone having a bone to pick or ulterior motives, that pretty much defines it to me.
Now, did you see any indication on the body of Layla that showed stomping?
No, I did not, and I've seen stomping injuries, I mean, many times, and there are no footprints, no transfer of, tread marks, anything at all that would indicate stomping to me.
Any evidence that she was kicked in the stomach?
No.
I want to talk to you about, with regards to the knuckles on, Mr. Chase was talking about the knuckle marks on Layla's back. Does it surprise you at all that there are knuckle marks on Layla's back?
No, it does not. And I've said this, multiple times today. This chaotic, panic-stricken, scared, a child dying in front of Ms. Rosenbaum and not knowing what to do and trying to do anything that she could to try to save the child's life. So striking the child's back, again, to dislodge this chicken, the child is not breathing. This is an episode that I would hope that no one would ever have to undergo ever again, because it is terrible. And in a situation like that, I don't know what I would do, quite honestly. And I know, I'm a doctor, I've been trained in things, but to watch this happen in front of me and know that there was, the child's life was in my hands, that would, I don't know, it would scare the living hell out of me.
With regards, Mr. Chase talked to you about when the first time was that Jennifer mentioned to anybody that there had been a ejection of a piece of chicken. Do you recall reading the police reports in this case?
Yes.
Do you recall whether or not Jennifer Rosenbaum told the detective, aren't you going to collect the chicken?
Yes. No, I do recall that, yes.
And that would have been before she had the luxury of making up her story, as Mr. Chase was stating. Isn't that correct?
Well, yes, and at that time, she did not know what internal sorts of injuries were present with Layla. She, as far as what I could tell, and I read this several times, Jennifer thought that Layla had suffocated on the piece of chicken, and by the time that she was able to get it out of Layla's mouth, the child, it was too far gone, and that was her concern.
With regards to this drain, in addition to the green piece that is in the drain, what other colored pieces are in the drain?
Well, there's, this is in the drain. There's yellow pieces here, yellow things that are somewhat tan looking. There's a yellow piece here, and then there's, I don't know what's obscured possibly, but there's white pieces over here. There's different things, different stuff, not just the green, which is the only thing that's there.
Let's talk about things that are rare. Does that mean that they're non-replicable because they're rare?
Well, no, absolutely not. Rare means you don't see them very often, that they are uncommon. They're, things that are, well, I hate to sound simplistic. Rare does not mean never. There's a difference between something that is rare or uncommon or not often seen or statistically small versus the things that do happen. There's an old saying I learned in medical school. When you hear hoofbeats outside the window, think of horses, not zebras. Meaning the most common things are the horses, not the zebras. Does not mean that the zebras don't exist, that there are not unusual things. I've spent much of my career seeing the zebras, the unusual things, the things that are statistically rare. So they happen. And the importance is understanding they happen and recognizing the exceptions when you see them, because it's all too easy to focus on what you think is most common and ignore the rare things.
Speaking about the case note article, that 11-year-old in the case note article that Mr. Chase was talking to you about, prior to his case note, there was nothing on Heimlich maneuver causing any death, correct?
Correct.
That doesn't mean that it did not cause him great pain, does it?
Oh, not at all. And in fact, the fact that a case report of a pancreatic transection, pancreatic injury from the Heimlich maneuver, the fact that this exists at all is of much greater interest than the difference, say, between this 11-year-old and Layla. I mean, this is an injury which prior to that time was unknown and had never been described, but it exists. And the fact that it does exist makes it of much greater importance when examining a situation like Layla's case. That's the whole point. If it had never existed in the entirety of human history going back to the dawn of time, well, that's something else. But the fact that there is a case report and literature that exists, case reports that 20 years ago no one knew about, well, this is why you can't just simply say, well, this did not happen.
Does science evolve over time?
Oh, absolutely. That's the nature of science, is that, yes, there is an evolution over time. And again, this is why I just mentioned injuries, say, related to CPR. If you read the things that have been written in the last 3 or 4 years, they're radically different than what existed, say, in the literature 20, 30 years ago. Just because with the accumulation of information, we know much more than what we used to know. And that, yes, science changes with time. It is not frozen.
Would we want it to be frozen?
Oh, Lord, no.
Why not?
Otherwise, well, we would never, we could not advance in the things that we know and understand and save people's lives and do a better job and understand possible complications. That's all the outcome of the evolution of science means that the medical care that we give is better. And problems that once were not even understood or known to exist, we know they exist now and they can be addressed and people's lives could be saved. That's the whole point, especially of medicine. The advances in medicine is knowing what we know now as compared to what we knew 20 years ago.
Let me ask you a little bit about the inner thigh pictures. We talked about those being finger marks, finger bruising from Jennifer grasping onto the legs of the child.
Yes.
Do you recall anywhere where Jennifer said the child was flailing and she had to immobilize arms and legs?
Well, yes, and that's it. That when she noticed that Layla had gotten silent and was flailing, sitting in her high chair, and flailing around, and Jennifer removed the tray, but had to restrain the child and to get some control over her because Layla was just out of control, and there was nothing at that point Jennifer could do without restraining the child, again, to try to assess what was going on, and then realize that Layla was probably choking on a piece of chicken. But, the child was not just laying still and holding still. She was, flailing is exactly the word that was used.
Now, Mr. Chase talked to you about the ulna being it could have been a defensive wound. Is that correct?
Well, yes, a defensive injury, that is, we typically mean, that's the arms raised in defense of a blow. That's something, do we as pathologists see that? Yes, it does not mean that all injuries like this must be defensive injuries by any means.
And would it have been consistent to have an injury like that if somebody had struck Layla with a cane?
Well, yes.
With regards to the deformity in the arm, what do you make of the fact that orthopedic surgeons, orthopedists and people who are setting arms and legs did not see that injury? What do you make of that?
Well, what I make of it is that they missed it. I mean, it was there and it's been there for a long, long time, but it was missed. And, you know, even by doctors who apparently palpated, felt the arm, you know, looked at Layla, but they didn't see it and they didn't find it. It just shows you that it can be difficult to see and is not uniform. Not everyone who ever looks at a fracture like this will always see it. It can be missed, even in qualified, you know, by experienced eyes and experienced hands.
Did Dr. Darasaw on palpation feel this break when she palpated the body?
No, not to my understanding. It was found on an X-ray. I mean, the X-rays that were taken of Layla after she had died, and lo and behold, here's this arm fracture that no one knew existed and had seen, and is not present in any of the records, even by the orthopedists who were examining her for her leg fracture, and even to the point of possibly suspecting there might be other, you know, this could be evidence of abuse. It still was missed.
If orthopedists and Dr. Darasaw was unable to feel it upon palpation or to see it upon sight, would you expect a layperson to be able to see it or feel it upon palpation?
No, I wouldn't expect that. I think it'd be unusual. You know.
With regards to your being paid for your time on this case, is $7,500 a royal sum?
Well, no, it's,
Did you discount it at all?
well, I mean, yes, I do. I think Mr. Prosecutor, pardon me for, I'm terrible with names and it's nothing personal. I am called to look at civil cases, especially from around the country, by plaintiffs and defense attorneys. What I charge is, you know, I would say typically 3 to 4 times at least what I requested to be paid for my time here. And that's just the nature of the, you know, forensic pathology experts. That's perhaps the going rate, I don't know, but I don't have any issue with that as far as what I asked to be paid for my time. Here, I reduced it quite significantly, and I've put in much, much more time than just, I would say, routinely that I would expect to be paid for, because I found this case to be not only challenging, but troubling in the sense that one has to look for the zebras. One has to look for, and someone who does what I do, you have to look to try to put the puzzle pieces together, because there's elements about this that are just not the typical, I say typical, child abuse case that I've seen so many times.
Would you have you turned down cases that you could not help the person with?
Oh, definitely. I've looked at reviewed cases, reviewed autopsies here in Georgia many times, where my conclusion was that I had really nothing to offer. The majority of them from the GBI, actually.
Talking about being paid, Dr. Darasaw, was she being paid?
Well, of course, she's being paid for her job. I mean, this is, you know, she doesn't do her job for free. I wouldn't expect anyone to do what she does or what any other pathologist does, you know, for free, because this is our time we're speaking about. And otherwise, you know, we could enjoy doing the job, but couldn't pay the mortgage.
Are there volunteer pathologists running around Georgia that are available for free of charge, to your knowledge?
I don't know of any.
I want to talk briefly about the age of the rib fracture. You said that was old too. How old can you put it at?
I would say, at least looking at it under the microscope, about 3 to 4 weeks approximately. based on the microscopic features, and there's no evidence of any abnormal healing from the rib fracture as compared with the arm fracture. I'd say approximately 3 to 4 weeks.
And the ulna?
The ulna, well, the healing is normal. Whether you want to give it the term of non-union, which seems to have somewhat of magical significance, it's not healing properly, and as a consequence is much older than the approximately 3 to 4 weeks that the radiologists seem to think it is, because it's just not healing right, and this is delayed, and there are microscopic changes. This could go back months, and I can't tell you how old it is because it's not healing the way it should, and because of that, it could be quite old.
With regards to child jumping on the bed, were you aware that Jennifer Rosenbaum, in her statement to police, said that the child bumped her head a lot of times?
I recall something like that. I mean, it wasn't just simply once. I mean, it was, more than one time.
Dr. Sperry, is there anything you have heard here from the prosecution that changes your opinion in any way about the accidental or undetermined nature of this death?
No, there isn't.
Would it surprise you, strike that, Mr. Chase talked about Jennifer going to see Dr. Duxbury and then going to another doctor. Would it surprise you to know that Dr. Duxbury did not accept Medicaid for a number of the elements of the cast that had to be placed on Layla? Were you aware of that?
No, I was not aware of that, and that's very fascinating because whether or not a doctor accepts Medicaid is oftentimes more important than treating the problem to start with. That's sadly the world we're in today.
Were you aware at all about whether or not Jennifer tried to go to Eggleston and tried to get an appointment at Eggleston? Were you made aware of anything with regard to that?
I don't recall specifically about that, whether she had tried and could not get an appointment. I just don't recall.
Did you know that Mr. Coppinger, who is...
Judge, at this point I would object.
I'll rephrase. Were you aware about whether or not Mr. Coppinger accepted Medicaid for those items that Dr. Duxbury did not?
No, I'm not aware of the specific billing nature about what was accepted by Coppinger versus Duxbury. I mean, that gets into issues that I rarely have knowledge about, but nonetheless, those kinds of things don't surprise me because, like I said, that those are,
Judge, at this point I would
well,
object. He said he doesn't have knowledge about it, and he was a forensic pathologist.
Well, sounds like speculation.
What do you make of the fact that one doctor does accept Medicaid and the other one did not?
as I said, sadly, that is what drives much of medical care these days, who accepts what kind of coverage. Now, I mean, there's an expectation, I think, to get paid for services, but that getting paid or not oftentimes makes more of a difference than treating the injury itself.
If I may just have a moment. Did Jennifer Rosenbaum, within a reasonable medical certainty, did she attempt to do CPR and Heimlich maneuver in a non-conventional way?
Well, in my opinion, she did. I think she CPR, the Heimlich maneuver, whatever she could to try to save this child's life. And as I've said, you've heard me say several times today, I think this was chaotic, frenzied, horrible, and panicked, and she was doing it to try to save this child's life, and unfortunately resulted in a bunch of injuries that are now found. That the price of trying to save the child's life was creating all of these things that are being interpreted as inflicted injuries. I think this was a terrible situation. I would never wish on any parent or caregiver.
Thank you, Dr. Sperry.
Thank you, Ms. Small.
Very briefly, Dr. Sperry. May I proceed?
You may.
At the GBI, x-rays are actually taken prior to the autopsy being performed, correct?
Correct.
They're generally taken by a tech, not by the medical examiner herself.
Yes, I don't think any of the doctors, frankly, are qualified to use a machine.
So, probably right.
Well, I know.
But so Dr. Darasol would have had the knowledge about the x-rays prior to starting the autopsy.
Your Honor, asks the speculation about what Dr. Darasol would know.
Response?
Is it common practice for the medical examiners to have knowledge of what the x-ray shows prior to the autopsy itself?
Well, it's a definite maybe. I mean, some things, like gunshot wound cases, absolutely, because we want to know if there's bullets inside someone and where they are. Other cases, maybe. It's harder to say. I mean, the x-rays are done, they're finished, then the exam is, proceeded with, but as far as knowing what's exactly on the x-rays prior to, conducting the exam of the body, that's much harder to say.
And one more question, do you have to make an appointment to go to an emergency room?
Do I have to make an appointment? What?
Make an appointment to go to an emergency room, to go to the Eggleston emergency room. Do you have to make an appointment to go there?
Well, it's interesting.
To go to the ER?
It's funny. Definitely, you asked that. Years ago, I mean, my daughter who just turned 30, she cut her chin. I had to make an appointment to get her seen. I had called there and they gave me a time to be there. That was very weird, but that's what I had to do.
All right, thank you, Doctor. You can step down.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Any objections? Witness being excused. Not in the state. All right, and you're free to go.
Thank you.
Okay, this seems like a good stopping point for this evening. Why don't we come back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock? Thank you all for your time and your attention and your patience today.